I am a Mongol general. I have seen unspeakable things. I have watched cities burn. I have heard the screams of thousands. I have seen rivers turn red with blood. Nothing shocks me now. I have grown numb to it all. But one day in 1220, standing in the ruins of a great city, I watched my Khan, the man I would follow into hell, give an order. It was so methodical, so coldly calculated that for the first time in my hardened life, I felt something I thought I had forgotten. Horror. Not horror at the violence. I am used to violence. My horror was for the system behind it. Because what Genghis Khan did to his slaves was not just brutal. It was something far worse. It was legal. It was organized. And it was justified by the very same laws that promised equality and justice for his own people. This is the story of the boy who wore a slave's yoke and became the man who built the largest empire in human history on a foundation of organized human trafficking. The truly terrifying part. The system he created was so effective, so rational, so perfectly designed that even today, scholars cannot reconcile the progressive lawmaker with the architect of systematic dehumanization. Stay with me. By the end of this, you will understand why Genghis Khan's approach to slavery was far more dangerous than simple savagery. You will also see why this matters for understanding power structures that still exist today. Let me take you back to the 1172 to the frozen Mongolian steppe. A teenager named Temujin sits in total darkness. His neck and hands are locked in a wooden, kangure torture device made for farm animals. The wood cuts into his flesh. He cannot lie down. He cannot feed himself. He cannot even scratch his own face. Every night, he is dragged to a different tent, handed to a different guard. He is no longer a person. He is an object, a trophy, living proof that his captors have broken his clan. But here is what is fascinating. While most prisoners in his place would dream of escape or revenge, young Temujin is studying. He is watching, learning, taking mental notes. He notices the guards get drunk. He sees them grow careless. He observes that on a festival night when everyone is celebrating, all discipline falls apart. He waits, and on that night he makes his move. But he does not just escape. He convinces one of his captors, a young man who had shown him a shred of kindness, to help him. Even in chains, Temujin was mastering the art that would define his empire, understanding what motivates people and using that knowledge without mercy. But the Kangyu was not his first lesson in powerlessness. Years earlier, when Temujin was just 9 years old, his father Yesugei was murdered, poisoned by rivals at a feast, the ultimate betrayal of steppe hospitality. In that moment, everything changed. His father's clan held a meeting. These were people who had sworn loyalty to his family, who had shared food and fought battles together. One by one, they looked at Temujin's mother, Ho-Lun, and her 5 small children, and they calculated. These 6 mouths to feed were a burden, a liability. So they left them in the open steppe in the dead of winter. Imagine being 9 years old, watching the only community you have ever known literally ride away from you, watching them choose survival over loyalty, watching them abandon a woman and 5 children to almost certain death. Ho-Lun kept them alive by sheer force of will. She taught them to dig for roots, to trap marmots, to eat things that were not food but would fill the stomach. A clan leader's widow, reduced to foraging like an animal. But young Temujin learned something else in those desperate years. He learned that every social bond, every sacred tradition, every oath of loyalty meant nothing when survival was at stake. The only thing that mattered was power. Raw, undeniable, terrifying power. The kind of power that makes betrayal impossible because the cost is too high. These experiences, the abandonment, the enslavement, the escape, forged something unique in Temujin's mind. He did not just want revenge. He did not just want power. He wanted to rebuild society itself from the ground up, according to a completely new logic. Think about it. Traditional Mongol society was built around family and tribe. Your loyalty was to your clan. But Temujin learned the hard way: family will abandon you. Tribal bonds are worthless. The whole system is broken. So he began to imagine something radical. A society where loyalty was not based on blood but on law. Where advancement was not based on who your father was, but on merit and absolute obedience. Where betrayal was not just shameful, it was impossible, because punishment was so swift and so certain that no one would dare. But here is the foundation of that vision. If you are going to rebuild society from scratch, you must draw a line. You must define who is inside and who is outside. You must decide who the laws protect and who they do not. And Temujin, the boy who had been treated as less than human, who had worn the slave's yoke, was about to draw that line in blood. The year is 1206. After decades of brutal war, Temujin has done the impossible. He has conquered or absorbed every major tribe on the Mongolian steppe. The constant raids, the blood feuds, the endless cycle of revenge that defined Mongol life for centuries, it is over. A great assembly is called Aquileia. Representatives from all tribes gather by the On River. There, under a white banner with 9 tails, Temujin is proclaimed Genghis Khan, the Oceanic ruler, or the universal ruler, depending on the translation. But Genghis does not celebrate by launching foreign wars. Not yet. His first act is far more radical. He announces a new legal code to govern this new nation, the Yasa. When historians first study the Yasa, they are often impressed. For the 13th century, some laws were shockingly ahead of their time. First, it became illegal to kidnap women. In a society where stealing brides was common, this was revolutionary. Women gained certain property rights. Adultery was punished by death for both parties equally. Second, all children were considered legitimate, even those born to slave mothers or concubines. In a world obsessed with bloodline impurity, this was radical. It meant a man born to an enslaved woman could, in theory, rise to command armies. Third, religious tolerance was the law. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and shamans could all practice freely. Genghis himself often spoke with holy men from different faiths. In an age of religious wars, this was enlightened. Fourth, a meritocracy was created. Promotion in the army was not based on noble birth, but on skill and results. A simple shepherd could become a general if he proved his worth. And, perhaps most telling, it became illegal for any Mongol to be enslaved. If a Mongol was captured, any other Mongol who found them was legally bound to free them. Failure to do so meant severe punishment. Reading these laws, you might think Genghis Khan, the boy who wore the slave's yoke, was building a fair society born from his own pain. You might think he learned compassion from his suffering. You would be wrong, because hidden within the Yasa were other rules, quieter ones. These rules showed the true shape of his new world. The same law that forbade enslaving Mongols explicitly allowed the enslavement of non-Ninus Mongols. The same law that ordered Mongols to help enslaved Mongols escape prescribed the death penalty for anyone helping a non-Ninus Mongol slave escape. Religious tolerance? Absolutely. As long as you paid your taxes and gave tribute when demanded. And part of that tribute could be people. Do you see what he did? He did not abolish slavery. He weaponized it. He built a system where all the progressive, fair laws applied only to one group, the Mongols. Everyone else lived in a legal shadow. They had no protections at all. But the Yasa did something even more fundamental. It smashed the old tribal system to pieces. Genghis reorganized the entire Mongol population and army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Your commander was no longer your clan chief. Your loyalty was not to your family. It was to your unit, and finally to the Khan himself. If one man in a unit of 10 ran from battle, the entire unit was executed. If one unit in a group of 10 broke, all 10 units were punished. This created a system of shared fate. Betrayal was not just dangerous for you, it was deadly for everyone you knew. Here lies the genius and the horror of it. This system did not rely on loyalty to a person. It relied on fear of a system. It enforced itself. It was impersonal. It was perfect. The first crack in this new order appeared early with a governor named Kuchi. Genghis had put Kuchi in charge of tribes in the Siberian forest lands. By all reports, Kuchi was a good administrator. The tribes paid their tribute. Order was kept. But Kuchi had a weakness. He began kidnapping local women for his personal harem. Not one or two, but dozens. He used his power to build a private collection of enslaved women. Remember, the Yasa clearly forbade kidnapping women. It was one of its most praised progressive rules. The local tribes pushed too far, finally rebelled. They captured Kuchi and killed him. So what did Genghis Khan do? Did he praise the tribes for defending their women? Did he admit that Kuchi broke the sacred law? No, he sent an army to crush the rebellion. The message was clear. Kuchi's crime was not the kidnappings. His crime was getting caught. His crime was causing unrest. He created a mess that required an army to fix. The Yasa protected women, Mongol women. Everyone else was in a different category entirely. His generals, who had been truly impressed by the Yas's progressive nature, began to understand. They had misread everything. The law was not about justice. It was about efficiency. It was about building a stable, powerful Mongol nation that could project force outward without eating itself alive. But they did not fully grasp the implications. Not yet. Not until Bukhara. Let me set the scene for you. The year is 1220th. Bukhara is a jewel of the Islamic world, a center of learning, art, and trade. Its libraries hold knowledge from across the known world. Its craftsmen make textiles and metalworks so fine that kings from Europe to China desire them. The markets overflow with silks, spices, and ideas. Nearly 30,000 people live here, protected by strong walls and a garrison of soldiers. And Genghis Khan is coming. The Mongol army arrives like a storm, but they do not attack at once. Instead, they wait. They surround the city completely. They cut off every supply route. Then they send a message to the city's ruler: surrender now, pay tribute, accept Mongol authority, and your city will be spared. Resist and face total destruction. The ruler makes a fatal mistake. He looks at his strong walls, his soldiers, his supplies, and thinks he can outlast them. He sends back a refusal. The Mongols do not bother with a long siege. They divert a nearby river. The water floods the city's defensive moat and breaks down the walls. In days, the outer defenses fall. The Turkish garrison, seeing the battle is lost, tries to fight their way out. They are cut down almost to the last man. The city's fortress holds for 12 more days, but it is hopeless. Where it falls, every soldier inside is killed. But here is what is important. The ordinary people are not massacred. Not yet. Genghis Khan himself enters the fallen city. He rides straight to the Grand Mosque, the holiest place in Bukhara. His soldiers throw the sacred Qur'an on the floor. They use the beautiful chests that held these books as feed troughs for their horses. Then he orders the city's elite, the rich merchants, the religious leaders, the nobles to gather in the mosque's courtyard. Imagine being in that crowd. Your city has fallen in days. You have seen your soldiers slaughtered. Now you stand before this short man with cold, calculating eyes. He speaks. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Think about the psychological war in those words. He uses their own faith against them. He tells them their own God sent him to destroy them. Their suffering is divine judgment. This is not just conquest. It is a spiritual annihilation. But then, something happens that will haunt his generals forever. The Mongol soldiers do not go on a wild rampage. There is no chaotic violence, no random looting or killing. Instead, they begin to sort. The entire population of Bukhara is divided into categories. The first category is skilled artisans, weavers who can make fine cloth, metalworkers who can forge weapons and armor, engineers who understand siege machines and water systems, scribes who read and write many languages. These people are registered. Their names are written down. Their skills are listed. They are told they will be moved to Kakarku, the Mongol capital, to work for the Khan. Their families can come. They will be fed, housed, and protected as long as they work. It is not freedom, but it is not death. It is a strange, privileged form of slavery. The second category, young, strong men. These are grouped into labor battalions. But here is where it turns truly dark. They are not just laborers. They are Hazar human shields. In the next siege, these men from Bukhara will be driven ahead of the Mongol army. They will be forced to fill moats with their own bodies, to climb walls, to absorb the first wave of arrows. They will die so Mongol soldiers do not have to. This is psychological war on a massive scale. Defenders in the next city will look over their walls and see their neighbors, fellow Muslims, being whipped forward by Mongols. The moral horror of killing their own people often breaks a city's will to fight before the battle even starts. The third category, women and children. These are divided further. Young, attractive women are given as property to Mongol soldiers or sent to slave markets. Some become concubines. Others become servants. Children are often taken into Mongol homes. This is not kindness. It is cultural assimilation. Raised from a young age, they forget their own language and culture. They become and function Mongol. It is a cultural genocide through adoption. The fourth category, the old, the sick, the disabled, those with no useful skills. These people simply vanished from history. We can guess their fate. None of the guesses are good. Now, imagine you are one of Genghis Khan's generals, watching this. You have followed this man for years. You believed in the Asa. You thought you were building something better than the old, violent steppe life. And now, you watch an entire city being processed like farm animals. You watch human beings reduced to economic units. You watch the same man who forbade enslaving Mongols, but received a systematic enslavement of tens of thousands. And then you understand. The Asa was never meant to protect people. It was meant to protect Mongols. Everyone else is not covered by the law. In a legal sense, they are not even human. They are resources, assets, property. One Mongol officer, his words later saved by Persian historians, wrote, "We had seen cities destroyed before. We had killed without mercy. But this was different. This was organized. It felt like we were farmers harvesting a crop, not warriors taking a city. And I realized in the Khan's vision that is exactly what we were." Some generals welcomed this new reality. They became administrators of human trafficking on an epic scale. They grew richer than they ever dreamed. But others struggled with it. Not because they were soft, remember, these were men in a brutal war, but because the system broke something fundamental in how they saw conflict. In traditional steppe battle, you fought an enemy. You beat them. You took their goods and maybe some slaves. It had a beginning and an end. This was different. This was turning conquest into a repeatable, industrial process. It was the Barricade satania of human suffering. And the most disturbing part? It worked. It worked incredibly well. After Bukhara came Samarkand, then Nishapur, then Merv, then Herat, then Baghdad. Each fallen city fed the machine. Historians estimate that during the Mongol conquests, between 1 and 2 million people were forcibly relocated across Asia. That number does not include those killed or enslaved in their own regions. Think about that. Moving 1 million people across a continent in the 13th century. The organization required was staggering. The record minus keeping the supply lines to feed them on the march the guards. The Mongols built an entire administrative system just to manage conquered populations. They created a registry that tracked skilled workers across the empire. A blacksmith taken from Bukhara might find himself in Kirkuk, working next to a Chinese engineer and a Russian goldsmith. In a twisted way, it was one of the world's first global workforces. But what made the system truly insidious was the hierarchy it created among the slaves themselves. At the top, the skilled artisans working for the Khan. They had a strange security. As long as they produced, they were valuable. They were fed. Their families were safe. Below them, domestic servants and concubines. Their lives depended on their owner's mood, but they lived in relative comfort. Below them, farm laborers and general workers. They did the empire's hardest work, but they were alive. They had a tiny chance to improve their situation. At the very bottom, the Hazhar, the human shields. Their life expectancy, once given this role, could be measured in weeks or months. This hierarchy made the enslaved people compete with each other. The artisan did not want to become a laborer. The laborer was terrified of becoming Hazhar. So they worked harder. They did not rebel. They informed on each other. The system made the enslaved police themselves. The economic impact was staggering. Mongol nobles, once relatively poor by steppe standards, became unimaginably wealthy. A single successful campaign could give a general dozens of skilled slaves, hundreds of pounds of silver, and valuable trade connections. Some commanders became human traffickers on a grand scale, selling captives across the empire. The Mongol capital, Kirkuk, transformed. It went from a camp of tents to a glittering city built by enslaved artisans from a dozen conquered cultures. The great palace had Chinese-style roofs, Persian-style gardens, and European metalwork. It was a monument built by organized exploitation. Perhaps the most effective part of the system was how it used fear as a weapon. The Mongols developed a sophisticated propaganda network. Merchants, travelers, and survivors spread the stories. They told of the sorting of entire populations being processed with cold efficiency. The genius was this: these stories made other cities surrender without a fight. When the Mongol army appeared outside a city's walls, the defenders now knew exactly what would happen if they resisted. They had heard about Bukhara and Samarkand. They knew about the categories. So, many cities simply opened their gates. They accepted Mongol rule. They paid the tribute. They gave up the demanded share of their population for slave labor. In this way, the system of organized slavery became a tool for bloodless conquest. The horror of it was so well known that the mere threat was enough. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his empire was divided among his sons and grandsons, and every single one of them kept the system running. Hulagu Khan, who conquered Baghdad in 1258, used the same sorting process. Kublai Khan in China built it into his own laws. The Golden Horde in Russia demanded tributes of people from Russian princes. The system outlived its creator by centuries. Elements of it persisted in Central Asia until the Russian conquests in the 1800s. That is over 600 years of organized human trafficking. Here is what makes Genghis Khan so difficult for historians to judge. By the standards of his own people, the Mongols, he was a truly progressive leader. He promoted men by merit, not birth. He protected Mongol women from certain abuses. He allowed religious freedom. His laws brought a stability to the steppe that it had never known. For the average Mongol, life became longer, safer, and more prosperous. It was a golden age. But that golden age was built on a foundation of the systematic dehumanization of everyone else. It is easy to call him a monster. But monsters are often chaotic, driven by rage or madness. Genghis Khan was not that. He was rational. He built systems. He wrote laws. He planned for the future. That is what makes him more terrifying. His cruelty was not a loss of control. It was a tool, carefully applied. Now we must be careful. Drawing straight lines from the past to the present is risky and often wrong. History never repeats itself exactly. But the underlying logic we see in Genghis Khan's system, the idea that you can have fair, progressive laws for your own people while systematically exploiting everyone outside that circle, this is not some ancient oddity. We have seen this pattern again and again. In the 18th and 19th centuries, colonial empires like Britain and France had the rule of law and democratic ideals at home. Yet, they built their wealth on the organized exploitation of people in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The founders of the United States wrote that all men are created equal while building a nation that depended on the brutal, systematic slavery of millions. In the 20th century, the Nazi regime created social programs and economic growth for so-minus called Aryan Germans. At the very same time, they were building the machinery for industrialized genocide. The pattern is this: draw a circle around us, create laws that protect us, then treat everyone outside that circle not as people, but as a resource to be managed, used, or discarded. Genghis Khan did not invent this logic, but he perfected it in a way and it was terrifyingly effective for his time. He turned it into a clean, repeatable system. So, how do we judge him? In Mongolia today, he is a national hero, the founding father. He is celebrated on currency, in statues, and in the national story. From this view, they are right. He united the warring tribes. He created a proud identity. He brought safety laws and greatness to the Mongol people. In Iran, Iraq, Uzbekistan, and parts of Eastern Europe, his name is often spoken with a shudder. He is remembered as a catastrophic destroyer. Ancient cities were wiped off the map. Canals and libraries were burned. The death toll of the Mongol conquests is estimated between 30 and 40 million people, about 10% of the world's population at the time. Both views are accurate. That is the uncomfortable truth. This brings us back to where we started, to that Mongol general standing in the ruins of Bukhara, feeling a chill he thought he could never feel again. Some of those generals walked away troubled. They accepted it as the price of building an empire. Others embraced it fully and grew rich from the machine. A very few left behind whispers of doubt in the pages of history, but none of them stopped it. They couldn't. The system was too big, too efficient, too deeply built into the bones of their new world. To oppose it was not just to oppose the Khan, it was to oppose the very logic of the empire they had helped create. And maybe that is the most disturbing lesson of all: people can know they are part of something monstrous and still participate, because the system makes escape seem impossible. This is not just a history problem. It is a human problem. So here is the question I will leave you with. How many systems do we live within right now where people sense something is fundamentally wrong, but participate anyway? Systems that are so big, so complex, so woven into our daily lives that fighting them feels futile. Where do we, often without even thinking, draw our own invisible lines between people who matter and people who are other, between us protected by our rules and those exposed to our exploitation? How often do we, like those Mongol generals, tell ourselves that the efficiency of a system, its order, or its benefits for us, justify its inherent cruelty? The story of Genghis Khan's slavery system is not just about one man or one empire. It is a powerful case study in how humans rationalize organized cruelty when it is dressed in the language of law, progress, and civilization. The boy who wore the slave's yoke became the man who built an empire on systematic enslavement. He did it not through mindless rage, but through cold calculation. Not through chaos, but through order. His weapon was not just the sword, but the ledger book and the legal code. That should terrify us more than any story of simple barbarism, because it means the greatest horrors are not born in moments of madness, but in moments of calm, careful planning. The most dangerous threats to human dignity are not the ones that break the rules, but the ones that write the rules to serve their own purpose. If you found this journey into the darker mechanics of power valuable, you are in the right place. On this channel, we don't sanitize history. We examine how power truly works, show systems of control are built, how they function, and why they persist across centuries. We look at the past not to condemn it, but to understand the patterns, so that we can recognize the faint echoes of those patterns in our world today, so that we can ask better questions about the systems we live in and the lines we choose to draw. Thank you for watching. If you want to join this exploration of history's hard truths, make sure to subscribe. We have many more discoveries to make together. See you in the next video. Let's push this story forward, beyond the life of the great Khan himself. What happened to the machine he built? Did it die with him? Or did it, like a virus, find new hosts? The answer lies in a story few people know, about a man who was both a product of the system and its ultimate proof of concept. His name was Chagatai. Chagatai was Genghis Khan's second son. He was known as the guardian of the Yasa. He was stern, unforgiving, and fanatical about his father's laws. When Genghis died, the empire was split. Chagatai received Central Asia, the heartland of the Silk Road, dotted with ancient cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, places still rough from the sorting. And here, Chagatai faced a problem. The system was designed for endless expansion. It needed fresh conquests, new populations to process, to feed the engine of relocation and tribute. But the great wave of conquest had slowed. The empire was vast, river-studded. It cannot conquer forever. So, Chagatai did something ingenious. He turned the system inward. He applied its cold logic not to new enemies, but to the economy of the empire itself. He looked at the thriving Silk Road trade running through his lands. He saw the caravans of merchants, Persians, Arabs, Chinese, Indians moving silks, spices, and gems. And he saw a resource that was not being fully processed. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was dangerous. Bandits, greedy local rulers, shifting alliances. The Mongols famously made it safe. A Nadan carrying a sack of gold could walk from one end of the empire to the other, the saying went. But this safety had a price. Chagatai institutionalized that price. He didn't just tax the goods. He taxed the people moving them. He created a new category, the Ertiaku merchant. An Ertiaku was not a free raider. He was a partner of the state. In return for the Mongol guarantee of safety and the use of the empire's incredible postal relay system, the Ertiaku merchant agreed to something huge. He became a tax farmer, a census taker, and an extension of the slave registry, all in one. Here's how it worked. A wealthy Persian merchant from, say, Tabriz would become an Ertiaku. To get a passport, a tablet of authority, a paise. This let him travel freely, but his caravan now had extra cargo. Mongol officials would attach a scribe to his train. As the merchant traveled from city to city trading silks, the scribe was doing something else. He was quietly recording everything. How many skilled glassblowers lived in this town? How many healthy young men of military age? What was the output of the local pottery kilns? The scribe was updating the human and economic inventory of the empire. Furthermore, the Ertiaku merchant was given the right to collect taxes for the Mongols in the regions he traveled. He would advance the tax money to the Mongol treasury, then go out and collect it from the population, keeping a profit. This gave the Mongols upfront cash handouts, whilst the dirty work of extraction. But the darkest part was this: sometimes the tax was not paid in silver or silk. It was paid in people. If a town was behind on its tribute of skilled workers, The Ortaq merchant, with his private guards, could be authorized to make up the shortfall. He could literally select people from the marketplace and take them. Imagine you are a potter in a small town in Persia. A trade caravan arrives. You go to sell your wares to the merchant. He looks at your hands, notes your skill. He asks about your family. A week later, Mongol soldiers arrive. They have a record. They know your name, your skill. They say you have been taxed. You are now property of the Khan's workshop in Kirkuk. The Ortaq merchant has already been paid for you. The system had become self-aware. It no longer needed a massive army to conquer a city to get slaves. It could harvest them through commerce and bureaucracy. The census, the tax roll, and merchant's ledger, these were now tools of human trafficking. The violence was not gone, but it was in the background, a threat that made the paperwork enforceable. This is what Chobit, I understood the ultimate power is not the power to destroy, but the power to categorize into record. Once you are in the system as a number, a skill set, a tax liability, you are already controlled. This bureaucratic monster reached its peak under a later ruler, a grandson of Genghis named Gehazi. Gehazi ruled the Ilkhanate in Persia. He is a fascinating, contradictory figure. He converted to Islam. He built mosques and universities. Historians sometimes call him a reformer. And he was for the system. Gehazi looked at the slave economy and saw inefficiency, constant rebellion in the provinces, skilled workers dying on forced marches, corruption among officials who skimmed from the human tribute. The machine was rusting. So Gehazi the reformer passed new laws. He fixed the system. He decreed that skilled slaves, artisans, engineers could no longer be arbitrarily taken from their workshops. Instead, they were to be registered to state-owned factories right in their home provinces. They would live in attached compounds. They would be paid a small wage, enough to feed their families. In return, they would work exclusively for the state, and their children would inherit their job. On the surface, this looks more humane. It looks like a shift from slavery to something like serfdom or state employment. But look closer. The workers could not leave. They could not change jobs. Their children were bound to the same fate. They were paid, but far below the value of their work. They were now permanent, hereditary, state-owned asset class. Gehazi didn't free the slaves. He turned them into human infrastructure. Like a road or a canal, they were a maintained, productive part of the empire's machinery. They were given just enough to keep them working efficiently, generation after generation. The violence of the whip was replaced by the quiet, lifelong pressure of debt, family obligation, and legal bondage. This was the final evolution of Genghis Khan's original idea. From the raw, brutal sorting of Bukhara, to the commercial harvesting of the Ortaq system, to Gehazi's cold, bureaucratic human infrastructure. The boy in the wooden canoe had set in motion a logic that outgrew him. It learned, adapted, and found ways to hide its chains behind ledger's laws. In even the guise of reform, the Mongol Empire fractured and faded, but the logic it perfected did not. It seeped into the groundwater of history, resurfacing in empires and systems that came after. The idea that people could be categorized, registered, and managed as state assets proved too powerful to forget. Consider the Timurid Empire built by Timur or Tamerlan, who saw himself as Genghis Khan's true heir. He copied the military organization, the terror tactics, but most tellingly, he copied the systematic relocation. After sacking Delhi in 1398, he didn't just loot treasure. He marched back to Samarkand with a column of thousands of skilled artisans, stonemasons, weavers, calligraphers to build his capital. It was Bukhara all over again, but with a new twist. Timur specifically targeted artists and intellectuals. He wasn't just building an army or a city, he was building a cultural capital on the backs of enslaved genius. The system now understood the value of branding and soft power. This logic traveled west. The Ottoman Empire developed the Dansami system, the collection, or gathering. Christian boys from Balkan villages were taken, converted to Islam, and trained to become the empire's elite soldiers. Janissaries were administrators. It was a form of human tribute, systemated and ritualized. Like the Mongol sorting, it was coldly rational. It removed potential rebels from their homeland and turned them into the empire's most loyal servants. It was not random slavery, it was a state talent acquisition program, fueled by human lives. The Ottomans created a whole bureaucracy around it, with registrars, quotas, and training schools. They echoed the Mongol Kheshig, the Khan's elite guard, often drawn from trusted sons of other tribes, and their slave registries is unmistakable. But perhaps the most direct descendant of the Mongol system was born far from the steppes, the European colonial corporation. Look at the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company VOC in the 17th and 18th centuries. They were not nations. They were chartered companies with private armies, the power to wage war, make treaties, and govern territory. And their core logic was pure, distilled Genghis Khan. First, they drew a circle. The charter granted by the king or parliament gave rights and protections to the company's shareholders and employees. Thus, everyone outside that charter, the people of India, Indonesia, Africa, existed in a legal gray zone. Second, they created their own laws and courts to govern their operations, often bypassing local and even home-country justice. Third, and most critically, they turned human beings into inventory. The VOC's meticulous ledgers didn't just track tons of pepper or bundles of nutmeg. They tracked human cargo with the same cold precision. Slave ships had manifests listing people as pieces. Plantation records listed workers as units alongside tools and livestock. The Mongols used scribes on the Silk Road. The VOC used clerks in Batavian Cape Town. The paperwork of suffering was identical in spirit. The East India Company didn't just conquer India through battle. It did so through systematic economic manipulation. It would use its military power to break local weavers' guilds, then impose laws forcing weavers to work exclusively for the company at fixed, poverty-level prices. This was chattel slavery in fields. It was indentured servitude enforced by contract and law. Workers were legally bound to produce for their master, trapped by debt and regulation. This was an estate-owned factory system, reborn under a corporate logo. The true legacy of the Mongol system, therefore, is not the horse archer or the siege engine. It is the blueprint for corporatized, bureaucratized control. It demonstrated that the most effective domination doesn't always look like a horde screaming over a wall. Often, it looks like a merchant with a ledger, a tax collector with a census, or a company agent with a standard form contract. This brings us to the final, haunting question for our modern world. We have outlawed the obvious forms of this system, but have we eradicated the underlying logic? Do we not see a shadow of the sorting in the algorithms that categorize us? Not into artisans or ishar, but into credit scores, advertising profiles, and risk categories. These digital categories determine what opportunities we see, what loans we get, even how police patrol our neighborhoods. They are modern, invisible versions of the Mongol registry. They are created not by a Khan's decree, but by code and data, and they can be just as decisive and impersonal. Do we not see an echo of the circle in the legal frameworks of global trade? Where labor and environmental laws are strong inside one nation, the circle, the corporations can outsource production to places where those protections are weaker, unenforced outside the circle. The people making our devices and clothes are, in a legal and economic sense, often living in a different world, just like the Mongols outside the Yosa. The modern RTAQ merchant might be a gig economy platform. It offers safety and connection, the app, the payment system to the worker, while quietly harvesting data, setting prices, and managing a vast, decentralized workforce with minimal legal responsibility. The worker is an independent contractor, not a slave, but the power to categorize, to rate, to deactivate an account, creates a control that is profoundly powerful. The genius and the curse of Genghis Khan's system was its adaptability. It was a template. It showed that by combining a clear in-group out-group distinction with a bureaucratic method for managing the out-group, you could build something terrifyingly stable and productive. When we look at history, we often look for the fire and the sword. But the story of the Mongol slave system teaches us to look for the clerk, the ledger, and the law. It teaches us that the architecture of control is often more important than the act of violence. The violence merely enforces the architecture. The boy in the can, you learned that powerlessness came from being someone else's property. His tragic, world-altering legacy was to prove that the most formidable form of power is the power to turn other human beings into legible, manageable, and expendable components of a system. And that is a lesson that, for better or worse, the world never forgot. The systems changed their names, their technologies, and their justifications. But the core logic of categorized, bureaucratized human utility, born on the cold steppes in the 13th century, continues to shape our world in ways we are only beginning to recognize. Our journey is complete. The system's story, from its raw, brutal birth to its subtle, pervasive echoes, is told. The question it leaves us with is not about the past, but about the present in our complex, data-driven, globally connected world. Where have we drawn our circles? And who have we, perhaps unintentionally, placed outside them?